Yes, so let's do together a short grounding practice to get a sense of how you're feeling right now in the moment and get a sense of the collective field we're creating together. So please get a bit more comfortable in your seat and close your eyes if that feels right. Take a deep breath and slowly begin to scan your body from head to toes, just to get a sense of your inner weather. What physical sensations are present? What emotions are arising? And bring your attention to the points of contact where your body is touching the surface you're sitting on. And notice the firmness of this surface, how it's holding you, and how it is held by Mother Earth. She's holding you right now with everything that is present for you. She is holding each one of us. And she's holding the stories we're about to share. Just take a moment to feel how you are held. And please take another deep breath. And on the out breath, begin to bring your attention slowly outwards again, gently bringing attention to the room you're in and back to the screen and storytelling circle we're in, so we can listen together to what Mother Earth has to say to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for guiding that as we now enter this important bit of storytelling, because we live now in a world in a world with a story of a broken imagination that has reached a dead end. We live in a story right now that is going and woven and written to the beat of a war drum. And now is really a time where it is so important to listen and believe in other possibilities and other stories. And I hope that today we can listen to that and also share and have a little discussion in the end. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have, and I'm very excited to introduce them. This is not all of the writing fellows, and we only have a handful today. So first we have Mohini, who is an unschooled student since the age of 10, I believe, and she's a brilliant writer and activist from South Africa. We have Andrea, who just led our grounding, and she's an emergence facilitator and writer working at the intersection of collective healing, social change, and nature-based wisdom from Romania. We have Pooja, a dreamer and researcher working with the Emergence Network and Radical Ecology and Democracy from India. We have Freia, an artist, educator, workshop facilitator, and PhD researcher in women's spirituality based in Turtle Island. And we have Rolande, who actually isn't present right now, I think, because of potentially an internet issue. And so if she doesn't come on, I will help read her story. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mohini.
Thank you, Vespera, and hello everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you all. I'm Mohini, and like Vespera said, I'm based in South Africa, and I wrote about men's versities. And it felt cosmically aligned in some ways to be assigned men's versities as a theme to write about, because there was just so much that I didn't know. Like first, not fully being able to compute what exactly men's versities is. I'm wondering, yeah, if there's a couple of you here who are also in that same position. But I really had to sit with the not knowing and kind of reconfigure that as a strength and not a source of anxiety leading up to this project. And so naturally, I began with analyzing. So I twisted and contorted the words and their meanings, but the word itself resisted easy passing. At first, it was like men, sever, diversities, adversities, universities of men, like syllables slid around, and that slipperiness felt weighty. But writing about men's versities lovingly forced me to hold multiple crises in view simultaneously, and specifically through my writing to understand that the crises we face are, of course, expressions of the same fundamental fracturing, and that mere fact connects us not only to one another, but to the crises themselves. At first, I felt disqualified. Being socialized as female, I was uncertain whether I had any legitimate ground to stand on when writing about an experience so apparently distant from my own. And then from then I had overcorrected, and I decided that this distance was in fact an asset. I could be neutral and I could be objective and uncontaminated by proximity. And I held onto this for a while because it felt like a pretty solid footing. And then coincidentally, the deeper shift I experienced was truly being able to recognize that who we are, of course, isn't separate from these crises. We're constituted by them, we're shaped by them, and implicated by them. So my proximity to masculinity or lack thereof didn't grant me some ability to see more clearly. It was instead my messy, complicated history that I hold in relation to masculinity that allowed me to engage with this work in the most meaningful way. So I was really able to see that there's no position outside, no observation point. We're witnessing this unraveling as a part of it. And the shift and this acknowledgement was continuously reflected back to me through the interviews I had. But one particular example is a conversation I had with Pat McCabe, Women Stand Shining. Pat is a ceremonial leader, an artist, a mother of 4 boys, who has spent decades weaving together Indigenous wisdom and earth-based healing at the intersection of the masculine and feminine. And she affirmed that this fracturing I'd experienced in relation to masculinity and the fracturing that men experienced within it were not parallel wounds, like running alongside each other, but the same wound being felt from different sides. An example she described was dropping her youngest son off at school and watching these children file into these lines with their hands behind their back, heads down, forbidden from moving or reaching out to touch a friend. And I really felt it. I felt it as someone who recognized that same logic that had shaped me, that same power over paradigm in a different register diminished them as well. And Pat said that the masculine isn't the problem. The disconnection from sacred role is the problem. And so what I was able to see is that what we call toxic masculinity isn't some inherent darkness, but what any human becomes when forced to survive systems that demand that they abandon and let go of their tenderness and their aliveness. And so this is where I recognize the aforementioned shift, that of course my liberation and theirs were not separate projects I could choose to care about in sequence. They were fundamentally the same. And I of course knew this, but it wasn't until coming out of these conversations that I really knew this, so I really could feel it. Our experiences aren't identical, but through the conversations I had, I was able to more clearly see how being asked to hold ourselves together inside systems that were never designed for our wholeness connected us across the separation of gender, and how the same logic extends outward to every severing the power over paradigm depends on. Mind from body, and from old, human from nature. And it was through this that I came to understand men's versities was never just about men. But it was, for me, about the structure of separation itself and what becomes possible when we begin to refuse it. Thank you, everyone. I'd love to pass it on back to Andrea now.
Thank you, Mohini. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea, and I wrote about forest versities. And picking on what Mohini said last about the lack of separation and that everything is connected to everything else, I want to share with you about what I feel it's a grounded and rooted layer of what this actually means for our day-to-day lives. And this is a shift in perspective that I got after I interviewed Chief Ninawa, who is an indigenous leader of the Huni Queen tribe living in the Amazon forest in Acre, Brazil. So he shared with me about the 5 layers of education in the Huni Queen cosmologies, which are actually the 5 layers of how to relate to Mother Earth. So he told me that first comes respect, and then respect is followed by reverence, which is recognizing nature as the source of life. Out of reverence, reciprocity emerges, and this layer deepens into responsibility. And he told me that this is their level of their equivalent of the PhD level of education, when you begin to cultivate responsibility towards the future. And finally, the 5th level is regeneration, the level where one learns to regenerate with the cycles of Mother Earth and actually supports Mother Earth to regenerate. And here he said something that struck me, which is in order to regenerate Mother Earth, we need to ask ourselves not what kind of world do we want to live for our children, but what kind of child do we want to live for the world? And this is a shift in perspective which was really powerful for me to realize, because if everything is connected to everything else, then responsibility towards the whole becomes central to the relationship. And from their point of view, it's central to what education is about. And this is a shift from seeing education as merit or value or something that is serving me, something that serves the individual, towards education that cultivates responsibility towards the web, towards the web of beings that make our lives possible second by second. Yeah, to me, this is the recognition that we humans are in service to Mother Earth and not the other way around. And this completely flips over the way I was raised in my own culture. This shift in perspective is really inviting me to stretch my imagination, I feel, because my imagination, and I feel our imagination in the modern world, has been colonized. And it invites me to stretch with questions like, for example, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I'm asking myself, how am I raising her to be responsible for the web of beings that make up our local ecosystem? What are the systems of knowledge that can help me learn how to regenerate with Mother Earth so I can teach her that, because I don't know how to do that right now. And what are the types of pedagogies that can teach me that? So for me, what I came to realize after doing these interviews, about which I wrote in this article on forest versities, I think it's really incredibly useful and valuable that we still have indigenous wisdom that we can turn to. But for me, the conclusion was that actually the first step is to re-enter in relationship with the more than human beings, actually to just take a first step, to be present with them, to go outside, spend less time offline, and be present with a tree and cultivate a relationship over time, because out of that relationship, the remembering will come. The knowledge is still there, alive. So this is yes, this is my message coming from the forest, is that she's really calling for our imagination to stretch and to grow roots. Thank you. And now I'll invite Pooja to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. I'm Pooja, and I journeyed with rivers and riverversities during my fellowship. Andrea left us with something beautiful. She said, the forest is calling for our imagination to stretch and grow roots. To this, I will add, the river is inviting us to radically reimagine our relationships. Throughout the process of listening, receiving, gathering, and weaving stories during the fellowship, what became so clear to me was that every attempt at breathing life into a new world begins in the imagination. To imagine other worlds is an act of radical courage, because it not only resists, disrupts, and subverts systems and structures, but it also cultivates the soil for new possibilities and new ways of living, being, and relating to each other and the more than human world. The river projects I wrote about span from South Asia to South America, but I'd like to zoom in and invite you to accompany me on one particular project, which was the Pasos de Agua, or the Steps of Water project. It is rooted in Barichara, a small town in Colombia. And last July, when I connected with Felipe Medina and Alejandria Camargo Borda, the stewards of this project, they very generously offered me their story. So they had arrived in Barichara in 2019 and were shocked to witness that the Barichara Creek, which is the main water source of the town, had reached high levels of contamination and toxicity. The water was undrinkable. And most adults in the town had accepted this reality because they couldn't see any other alternative. But the children of Barichara refused to believe that nothing could be changed. Without water, there is no life, they said. They had a dream, a longing, a desire that flowed and was nourished from their imagination. They asked, what would Barichara look like if it was treated with care? What if the people of Barichara reimagined their relationship with the creek and saw it as the source of life? The Pasos de Agua project was born from this dream. Rather than teaching children about the water crisis in a classroom or imposing any solutions to them, the project created a container to listen to the wisdom of children and the wisdom of the wider ecosystem. What was interesting was walking became the primary pedagogy of this project. During these walks, children let their curiosity guide them, and the adults followed them, offering support when they can. The children engage with communities, the cultural memory keepers of the land who have been living in close relationship with both land and water. They learned about the stories and myths of Barichara, and in turn, they carried these stories to decision makers and other stewards on the ground. As they began to clean parts of the creek and also demand more responsible leadership, they did so by joyfully singing songs of Barichara's past and also writing about its beautiful future. They didn't just dream for Barichara, but they dreamed with the water. I was so moved to tears when I heard this story because it made me wonder, what if the use of education is primarily about being in deep relation with the waters that sustain our breath, our communities, our dreams, and our lives? The regeneration of rivers shows us that it's so deeply entangled with the regeneration of our collective imagination. Transformation happens in multiple realms simultaneously, whether it's cultural, spiritual, ecological, or imaginal. And the imagination for another future is born and nourished often from the memory of water. Water spills into the fertile soil of our imagination and allows new worlds to be born. So, are you ready to receive the gift of transformation that water offers to each of us? And in turn, are you watering your imagination? It has been 5 years since the Pasos de Agua project began, and the dream is still kept alive by the spirit of water and the stewards who tend to it. Large parts of the Barichara Creek look very different now, and they are unrecognizable. And despite there being a very long way to go to restore and regenerate this creek and to make the water drinkable again, I think this dream is not stopping the children who say very confidently that Barichara is only the beginning. They dream of restoring all of the rivers of Colombia, and I know that they are already breathing life into this dream. I am now going to pass it on to Freya. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. Hi, everyone. My name is Freya, and I'm coming to you from Muncie Lenape land on Turtle Island, and I wrote about sacred versities. So I think the most amazing thing that I came to discover from my time as an Ecoversity writing fellow was the realization that there were so many people and groups and organizations around the world who were challenging and changing the way that we experience education and learning. So these dreams are being brought to life all over the globe. My eyes were beautifully open to the work of people like Chef Noni and Dr. Funleo Wood, whom I had the opportunity to interview for my article, and who are using their sacred versities to serve their communities and the world in really, really unique and special ways. But it actually took me quite some time, longer than usual in a writing process, for me to get into the groove of writing about sacred versities. So in the beginning of the fellowship, I approached the idea of sacred versities, I think, as more abstract, as knowledge that was long held within us and the world around us, yes. But I saw sacred versities as these ancestral, spiritual, cultural, ecological knowing, but I still had a really hard time stepping out of theory and into practice. I had all these ideas about what a sacred versity was, but I couldn't or didn't really understand how they operated out in the world. But then I had my first interview, and I came to understand finally that sacred versities are very real, living institutions and organizations that are teaching generations of people to remember all this knowledge, ecological, cultural, through action out in the world and not just through theory. When I interviewed Dr. Wood, that's when that click really happened for me. I had been writing and writing and writing and doing the prompts and doing the research and getting feedback. And I was like, I don't understand, what it is I'm doing wrong, even though it wasn't wrong. So when I interviewed Dr. Wood, we had a really long, in-depth discussion, longer than we had planned, about her time in academia, in higher education, getting the PhD, teaching in institutions, and how she felt that there was so much sacred and ancestral knowledge that was missing from that space. And so her solution was to create those spaces for herself and for her community. So she took that knowledge out of this headspace and made it really tangible and physical for people. So she hosts workshops, she runs courses, she teaches Yoruba spirituality and language, and she created a conference and a community space where people can come and learn and share and be with one another, and reintegrate that knowledge into their lives right here and now. So by the time I got to my second interview with Chef Noni, I could finally see how a sacred university wasn't just an idea or theory, things we were writing about or thinking about, but a place where knowledge is actually remembered and shared and cultivated for generations to come through working with the land and with children in regard to Chef Noni. So that was a deeply, it was deeply, deeply moving for me. And it sort of cracked open forgotten knowledge and memories of my own ancestors and my own culture and things I wanted to do and be and see in the world. And it gave me just inspiration. And I realized that this inspiration, this knowing, this learning, these memories, they had always been secretly living inside of my heart, dormant, but waiting to be acknowledged and seen again. And for me, this remembrance led to a transformation and a decolonization further of my mind around what counts as education and knowledge. I think when you're doing a lot of theory, and I'll speak for myself because I believe this was part of that process. When you're doing a lot of theory, you'd think you're doing a lot of the decolonization of the mind, or I did. And when you actually put it into practice, it changes everything. So I thought I knew, but now I feel. I know now that I also am a living, walking, breathing sacred versity within my own right, and that I too can carry this knowledge forward for others. And so can we all. And I am eternally grateful for this experience and to be able to walk alongside you all. And I will pass the torch to Roland's words.
Thank you. Thank you, Freya. Thank you to our panelists. So Rolande unfortunately cannot be here with us. So I'll briefly share her story and her part. Rolande is from the DRC Congo. And when she was 15 years old, her and her family had to move to Uganda to the settlement camp, the Nakivale, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, settlement. When she was 15 years old, her life as she knew it was completely destroyed. What she originally thought, which was she had to get a degree, she had to, be the best student so she can get a good degree so she can support her family. The narrative that the modern world has fed to her was destroyed in a very violent way, right? Her family had to leave her country. And in her story, so hers was all about decolonizing education. She got to interview Priya about reclaimed sacred yoga and also about a university in Mexico called UMA, which is all about have a university that is all decolonized in the sense that it is completely project-based and there's no real subject, but the project itself is the class. But also her own story was part of the project because she is doing something extremely amazing. Growing up, she had to, on her own, unlearn this idea that education was the key to a good life because she had lost that model, she had lost that path. And through the cracks of herself in her settlement camp, in her refugee camp, she found herself rebuilding and looking at her own community and seeing the actual needs. So she turned to permaculture and she created a community within her own settlement camp called For Our Love of Nature, Felona. And slowly by slowly, she started creating projects such as kitchen gardens, such as shared community spaces, such as they're now actually building a community center for them to learn permaculture. She started understanding Ecoversities Alliance and found herself in this world on her own to build the world that she now believes in. And she is building an ecoversity not only for her own community, but for the belief that what she was fed, what the story that she was fed was truly not the one that for people in her countries and for her is the one that they can really truly follow anymore. So I'm so happy that everyone was able to be here. Thank you for listening. We're going to open up to discussion, but before we do that, I thought maybe it's appropriate just to share screen and just if you can, give some love and give some cheers. I'm going to share screen and show you guys our book. This is it. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to drop the link later. And now I want to open ourselves to space for questions and for discussion. And you can have the prompt, what is weaving back the world? You know, what stories come up for you? But, you know, any questions are also open. So I'll give that time. Let me remove spotlight. And feel free to just unmute or raise your hand. Any comments or any feelings arising from the stories? Yes, Namali. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong.
Nothing, no, that's fine. Nothing earth-shattering, just I can't wait to read the book. Thank you so much. I loved each and every presentation. It's so inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really happy to share it. It's really a labor of love. And we would hope, you know, if you can help spread the book around and share it, that would be really, really wonderful. Yeah, any other thoughts or?
I would be curious to know about like the inspiration for the idea of the fellowship, and then maybe also I remember hearing about it actually from Manish last spring when we were together, and it's so lovely to be here like 10 months later and like see the beautiful fruits. And I'm also curious about like it seems like it was such a diverse group of people, and I'm curious about the process, like not only of the producing of the pieces, but also of like the relational weaving, because it feels like weaving back the world has to include like weaving relationship, right? So any of you, if you want to share about your experiences like meeting each other and learning from each other and your processes and things like that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin, for this question. I would love to share first, and then maybe the fellows can also share. So Manish, for those who don't know, is an amazing trickster human, part of Ecoversity Alliance. And when he called me, he was like talking to me about this writing fellowship. I was like, wow, I'm so excited to apply. And that was all. That was the end of the conversation. And 2 months later, turns out I was the one curating and facilitating it. So the whole process itself, I think, really mirrors this weaving back the world. We had no blueprint, you know. I mean, we had a little bit because this writing fellowship was a seed that was planted actually a few years earlier. I think they tried to do this. There were some issues, and there was one or two pieces that came out, but it was a little rocky. So we had a meeting with Clement, actually, who was one of the first fellows. I don't know if some of us are friends with Clement as well. And he shared his experience, and I was like, okay, I guess. And so it was a real, like, kind of just feeling around in the dark is how I would feel like it. And there was an application. So that's also how we wove it together. There was like, yeah, but for me at least, it was a total surprise, right? I thought I was going to be a writing fellow. I was so excited to write, but you know, and then boom, we're out here. It's always a surprise. Yeah.
I'm happy to share a little bit about my experience as well. Yes, there was an application, and you know, what was really great about this process was that I was sort of forced out of, you know, Vespera mentioned that I'm working on my PhD, and so academic writing all the time for the last few years of my life, in a space where I was normally criticized for writing too romantically or flowery or poetically, and now I'm in this writing fellowship, and I'm being gently told, relax a little bit. What's going on in your heart? And I'm like, that's so interesting to me. And now I'm outside of the academic space, and it's like, can I not tap back into how Freya writes? Is it gone? And of course it wasn't. But I'm still peeling back the layers. And I think that realization was really, really important for me, powerful for me. And I'm not sure if anyone else feels the same way, because um, I had to drop back into a deep, deep listening, not just of the people who I was interviewing and being present for them. I had to listen to myself, and I haven't had to listen to myself in a deep, clear, trusting way in a really long time, because I've just been producing information but whose information, what information, and I had to really unpack a lot of that. It was definitely a process, and I still feel like a bit of an onion. I'm going to be pulling all the layers back for quite some time, but I'm really, really grateful that I have begun that again. And so for me, what was so valuable was interacting with others in community, where you can receive feedback and have to actually think about that feedback and how you're operating within this community space. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Freya.
also, the,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Pooja.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to share a little more, I feel what struck me was that during our very first, meeting together, the invitation was to write from the wound. So I think the prompt was the wound is the way back, or the wound is the portal to the way home. And I found that a bit scary and also so tender at the same moment, because it was a portal to vulnerability. And I remember, when I had submitted the application, I was by a river. I was in Ladakh, and I was by the river Indus. And I remember feeling the pain of, watching this river being so contaminated. And I submitted my application also, talking about the river, and then to be invited and to share about the wound and where that comes from, and then have it received by others with so much care and have a story be witnessed. I felt that was so powerful. And I feel that's what stands out to me, just the care and trust and vulnerability. And also starting almost each of the sessions with poetry and writing together and having space to go deep and to allow for both structure and emergence. I felt those are some of the ways in which I felt relationality was just the almost like the bedrock of this entire process.
Yeah, I won't add too much, but just to echo what everyone said, I think we all know ecoversities and this space and this movement and this community to be so incredibly beautifully diverse. And I feel like it was really incredible to have the writing fellowship reflect that. I think Erin, you spoke to that. Not only diverse in what we were writing about, but our own selves. And we were really invited to honor that and step into that. And so it almost felt a bit prefigurative, like we got to experiment with this way of writing and this way of relating to one another that, embodied all that we long for, which was really beautiful. And then on the more practical note, there were aspects of the fellowship that were just incredible. We had little sanghas that we were split into, and we had a massage train, a metaphorical massage train, where we all got to, like, we were all responsible for also reviewing and offering feedback to other fellows' writing, which also felt really beautiful because it wasn't that we were doing this in isolation. We were all together, creating this body of work. So yeah, it was a very precious and sacred experience.